She had been waiting for 6 hours. Nobody knew she could fire the CEO. Vanessa Brooks sat quietly in the marble lobby of Whitmore Enterprises, the soft morning light from the floor-to-ceiling windows casting warm reflections on the polished floor, her hands folded over a well-worn leather purse resting on her lap. Around her, the hum of elevators and distant conversations created a subtle rhythm, but she seemed entirely separate from it, a calm presence amid the corporate bustle. Her gray-streaked hair was neatly styled, her modest tweed coat slightly worn but impeccably clean, a silent testament to a life of careful choices. Employees passed by, some glancing briefly, others barely noticing her, assuming she was a visitor or perhaps a prospective client. Every now and then, a receptionist approached with a polite, cautious smile, asking if she needed anything, and Vanessa would nod, her expression composed, giving no indication of impatience or frustration. She observed the lobby like a conductor watching an orchestra, noting the subtle dynamics between staff and visitors, the hurried steps of assistants, the distracted gestures of managers, the quiet manners of high-profile guests. She did not fidget, she did not check her watch. Her presence itself was a quiet statement, each breath measured, her posture straight yet relaxed, radiating a patience and dignity that contrasted sharply with the hurried, almost anxious energy surrounding her. Outside, the city skyline shimmered under the early sunlight, casting long shadows through the glass walls, reflections dancing across polished surfaces, highlighting the contrast between what appeared and what truly was. Daniel Whitmore, the CEO, walked past 3 times in the span of an hour, his tailored suit crisp, his expression focused on the endless stream of meetings ahead, and he barely acknowledged her existence, assuming she was inconsequential. Vanessa watched him, noting each micro-expression, each gesture of slight frustration as he interacted with staff and visitors, cataloging the nuances of human behavior with meticulous attention. She noticed how certain employees deferred to him, how others avoided eye contact, and how the subtle hierarchy revealed itself in the smallest interactions. Yet Vanessa remained silent, serene, a quiet observer in a world that constantly assumed importance based on appearances. Her eyes, calm but discerning, took in every detail, from the shimmer of the polished floor to the precise timing of elevator doors opening and closing, each movement feeding into a mental map of the company's rhythms. She smiled faintly to herself, a gesture so subtle that only someone paying close attention might notice, and then she returned her gaze to the lobby, unshaken, unassuming, entirely in control of herself and her story. Every detail of her day, every interaction she witnessed, was noted with care, and the knowledge of her true influence, her ownership of 40% of the company, remained her silent secret, like a stone resting at the bottom of a clear stream, unrecognized yet unmovable, a quiet force beneath the surface of what everyone else perceived. The tension of the lobby, the unseen dynamics, and the unacknowledged power created an invisible current, carrying the scene toward the moment when perception and reality would collide, setting the stage for revelations that would leave the room irrevocably changed. By early afternoon, the steady flow of employees moving through the lobby had become almost predictable, a rhythm Vanessa Brooks could follow without ever looking at a clock. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from a nearby cafe kiosk every few minutes as executives hurried past carrying tablets and folders, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. Vanessa remained seated in the same chair beside the tall windows, her leather purse resting beside her and a small notebook now open in her lap. Sunlight poured across the pages as she quietly wrote observations in neat handwriting, occasionally lifting her eyes to study the world unfolding around her. At the reception desk, 2 young administrative assistants glanced toward her between tasks. "Do you think she is here for an interview?" one whispered. The other shrugged. "Maybe. Human Resources has been hiring lately." Neither intended any disrespect. To them, Vanessa simply looked like someone waiting for an opportunity. Her modest coat, practical shoes, and calm patience blended into the background of a corporate environment obsessed with appearances. Vanessa overheard the exchange but showed no reaction. Instead, she smiled softly and continued writing. The ability to listen without correcting people had become one of her greatest strengths over the years. Across the lobby, Daniel Whitmore emerged from a conference room accompanied by several senior executives. Their conversation centered on quarterly growth projections, market expansion, and investor expectations. Daniel moved quickly, barely slowing as employees stepped aside to clear a path. His attention remained fixed on the numbers waiting for him upstairs. As he crossed the lobby, his eyes briefly landed on Vanessa. For less than a second, he seemed to consider whether he recognized her. Then the moment passed. He continued walking without a word. Vanessa watched him disappear into an elevator and noticed the subtle tension in the shoulders of the executives who followed him. Power often revealed itself in body language long before it appeared in titles. Nearby, a young receptionist named Emily approached carrying a bottle of water. "Ma'am, I wanted to make sure you were comfortable," she said kindly. Vanessa accepted the bottle with gratitude. "Thank you. That is very thoughtful." Emily hesitated before sitting briefly in the chair beside her. "Are you waiting to meet someone?" she asked. Vanessa looked toward the elevators. "Yes," she replied. "I am." Emily smiled sympathetically. "It must be important if you have been this patient." Vanessa laughed quietly, a warm sound that seemed to ease the tension around them. The most important things usually require patience. The answer stayed with Emily long after she returned to her desk. Throughout the afternoon, Vanessa continued observing. She watched how security greeted certain visitors warmly, while barely acknowledging others. She noticed which employees smiled naturally and which smiled because they felt obligated. She paid attention to the janitorial staff who worked carefully around the edges of the lobby, often invisible to everyone else. At one point, she stood and helped an older maintenance worker pick up several dropped folders. The man thanked her, embarrassed. Vanessa simply nodded and wished him a good afternoon. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it revealed more about character than many boardroom meetings ever could. Outside the windows, clouds drifted slowly across the skyline, softening the sunlight and casting moving shadows through the building. Inside, the company continued operating exactly as it always had. Employees answered calls. Executives attended meetings. Visitors arrived and departed. Nobody noticed that one quiet woman sitting near the window was paying attention to everything. Nobody realized that every assumption being made about her was becoming part of a larger picture. And nobody knew that before the day was over, the same people who overlooked her would discover that she understood the company far better than most of the people running it. Vanessa Brooks shifted slightly in her seat, the leather of the chair creaking ever so softly as she straightened her posture and lifted her notebook to continue her observations. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall glass windows, casting a warm glow on the marble floors and creating long, shifting reflections that danced across the lobby with the movement of passing employees. Each reflection seemed to highlight the disparity between appearances and reality, a concept Vanessa understood deeply, having spent decades learning that true influence was rarely visible. She scribbled notes on interactions between staff and visitors, noting who hesitated, who smiled out of obligation, and who carried themselves with genuine confidence. Nearby, a junior manager walked briskly toward the elevators, nearly colliding with a maintenance worker carrying a cart of cleaning supplies. Vanessa's sharp eyes caught the subtle flinch of the manager, a micro-expression of frustration barely concealed. She wrote it down without judgment, simply cataloging patterns. Across the lobby, Daniel Whitmore, the CEO, emerged from a glass door with two assistants trailing closely behind. His tailored suit was impeccable, his tie perfectly knotted, but his gaze swept past Vanessa without recognition, a fleeting glance that barely registered her presence. Vanessa noted the brief flash of irritation in his eyes as he adjusted his cufflinks, a tiny detail unnoticed by most but telling in its subtlety. She continued to observe the rhythm of movement, the quiet power dynamics at play, and the manner in which employees deferred to certain individuals based purely on assumed status. Vanessa's hand moved steadily, her pen capturing small but critical insights, while she herself remained calm, composed, and entirely unassuming. A visitor approached the reception desk, and the receptionist, busy juggling multiple calls, nodded toward Vanessa. "Ma'am, is there anything you need while you wait?" Vanessa shook her head gently, her expression serene. "No, thank you. I am comfortable here." She returned her gaze to the flowing movement of people, taking in the minute details, the angle of a smile, the shift of weight from one foot to another, the subtle interactions that defined the hierarchy without a single word being spoken. The distant hum of air conditioning blended with the faint murmur of voices, and the occasional click of high heels on polished floors, creating a soundtrack to her silent surveillance. Time seemed to stretch, every moment rich with information, every gesture observed as if it were a clue to understanding the company's culture and hidden currents of influence. Vanessa's awareness extended beyond the lobby. She noticed the way sunlight glinted off the windows of the upper floors, the precise timing of elevator doors, and the micro-tensions in conversations that others missed entirely. Each note she made built a mental map of the company's pulse, a record of dynamics invisible to casual observers, yet essential to comprehending the full story of the people who ran and occupied the space. Despite the constant movement around her, Vanessa remained a steady, unshakable presence, her calm dignity a quiet counterpoint to the bustle, a silent assertion that true authority and insight were not always visible but profoundly influential. The afternoon had begun to drift toward evening, and the sunlight that once flooded the lobby now arrived at a softer angle, painting the marble floor with long golden reflections that stretched toward the reception desk. Vanessa Brooks remained near the window, her notebook resting on her lap as she quietly observed the company continuing its daily rhythm. Employees hurried between meetings carrying laptops and presentation folders, while visitors checked in with reception and waited for appointments. To most people, it appeared to be an ordinary day. To Vanessa, it was becoming a remarkably revealing one. Across the lobby, a young analyst stood near the elevators clutching a tablet against his chest. He appeared nervous, repeatedly checking the screen while glancing toward a conference room on the 20th floor. Vanessa noticed the tension immediately. His shoulders were rigid. His breathing was shallow. Every few seconds he rubbed his thumb across the edge of the tablet. Moments later, one of the senior vice presidents emerged from a hallway and approached him. The older executive did not raise his voice, but the conversation that followed carried an unmistakable edge. The analyst attempted to explain something, pointing to data displayed on the screen. The executive barely looked at it. After less than a minute, he dismissed the young man with a wave of his hand and walked away. The analyst stood motionless for a moment before lowering his eyes and slowly returning to a nearby chair. Vanessa watched the entire exchange. She did not know the details of the report. She did not know whether the young analyst was right or wrong, but she recognized disappointment when she saw it. She opened her notebook and quietly wrote another observation. Not about numbers. Not about performance. About culture. A few minutes later, Daniel Whitmore appeared again, surrounded by advisors and department leaders. The group crossed the lobby discussing expansion strategies and investor expectations. Several employees immediately stepped aside as the CEO approached. Daniel acknowledged only the executives walking beside him. His attention remained fixed on business objectives, deadlines, and meetings waiting upstairs. As the group passed, Vanessa's eyes briefly followed him. Daniel never looked in her direction. It was the fourth time that day. Nearby, Emily from reception watched the interaction. She had begun to notice something unusual. Most visitors who waited for hours became frustrated. Some demanded attention. Others complained. Vanessa did neither. She simply observed. She listened. She remained patient. The contrast felt increasingly impossible to ignore. "Would you like another bottle of water?" Emily asked when business slowed for a moment. Vanessa smiled warmly. "That would be lovely. Thank you." Emily returned with the water and hesitated before speaking again. "You seem very interested in how people work together here." Vanessa looked around the lobby. The maintenance staff. The receptionists. The security officers. The executives moving through glass corridors above. "A company tells its real story when nobody thinks they are being watched," she replied softly. Emily frowned slightly, considering the statement. Before she could respond, her phone rang and she hurried back to the desk. Vanessa turned her attention toward the upper floors visible through the central atrium. Reflections shimmered across glass railings as employees moved between offices and conference rooms. The company appeared successful from every angle. Efficient, modern, profitable. Yet throughout the day she had noticed small fractures beneath the polished surface. Dismissed voices. Unseen employees. Assumptions made too quickly. The details were subtle, but they mattered. As the afternoon light continued to fade, Vanessa closed her notebook and rested her hands gently upon it. Around her, the lobby remained busy, filled with movement, ambition, and carefully managed appearances. Nobody realized that the quiet woman sitting beside the window was evaluating far more than a building. She was evaluating the people inside it. And with every passing hour, the company was unknowingly revealing exactly who it had become. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the lobby, creating streaks of golden light that danced over the polished marble floors as Vanessa Brooks continued her quiet vigil near the window. The ebb and flow of corporate life moved around her. Executives hurried past, checking their watches and tapping on smartphones. Assistants balanced clipboards and documents, and visitors navigated the reception area with varying degrees of confidence. Vanessa's eyes followed every detail, noting subtle expressions and slight hesitations, the unspoken communication that most people missed entirely. She observed the receptionist, Emily, deftly juggling a flurry of calls while maintaining a polite smile, and the janitorial staff moving with precision to avoid disrupting the flow of foot traffic, their presence almost invisible to the busy office workers. Occasionally, Vanessa lifted her notebook to jot down observations, careful not to disrupt the rhythm of the lobby. Across the space, Daniel Whitmore emerged from an elevator, flanked by a group of senior executives, his posture commanding and precise. His gaze swept quickly across the room, acknowledging the familiar faces of department heads while completely bypassing Vanessa. The briefest flicker of surprise crossed his expression as his eyes nearly registered her presence, but he immediately returned to his focused demeanor, speaking quietly to the executives around him. Vanessa's attention to these fleeting moments provided her with a mental map of the company's dynamics, the silent hierarchies, the assumed authority, and the subtle micro-expressions that revealed more than any spoken word. Nearby, a young intern approached a small queue at the customer service counter, nervous and hesitant, adjusting the strap of her bag as she waited. Vanessa noticed the way she shifted her weight and avoided eye contact, patterns of behavior indicative of perceived status and confidence within the office environment. She noted it in her notebook, a small insight that would later become part of her comprehensive understanding of the people and the place. The sound of heels clicking against the floor and low murmurs of conversation provided a steady backdrop as Vanessa stood to stretch slightly, remaining composed and observant. Each gesture, each interaction, whether between employees, visitors, or leadership, was a data point in the ongoing narrative of corporate culture she was quietly documenting. As the afternoon progressed, Vanessa saw Daniel cross paths with a group of clients, the conversation polite yet clearly transactional, revealing priorities and subtle power plays in the way he positioned himself, gestured with authority, and directed attention. She continued to watch, silently absorbing the rhythm of interactions, cataloging behavior, and capturing nuances that would likely go unnoticed by anyone else. The atmosphere was one of controlled energy, a complex choreography of movement, attention, and silent assumptions. Vanessa's presence was calm and deliberate, a quiet force of awareness in contrast to the apparent busyness around her. Every detail, from the angle of a head to the fleeting glance of recognition, was recorded in her mind, creating a clear understanding of the patterns, behaviors, and hierarchies shaping the life of the company. Even in stillness, she was observing, understanding, and quietly asserting a presence that, though unnoticed by others, carried profound awareness of the environment and its unspoken truths. The lobby had settled into a quiet rhythm, yet Vanessa Brooks remained acutely aware of every movement, every hushed exchange and subtle glance that spoke volumes beneath the surface of the corporate veneer. Sunlight angled through the towering glass windows, scattering reflections across the marble floor, as she observed Daniel Whitmore approaching the reception desk with his usual air of controlled authority. His steps were measured, his posture perfect, and yet his eyes repeatedly skimmed over Vanessa without registering her presence, the same oversight that had defined their interactions all morning. She could sense the internal narrative forming in his mind, a prioritization of meetings, numbers, and perceived importance, the invisible hierarchy of power that dictated attention. Nearby, a group of interns whispered softly, exchanging notes and glances as they tried to navigate the space without drawing notice. Vanessa watched them with empathy, recognizing the microcosm of uncertainty, ambition, and careful calculation within their gestures. The receptionist, Emily, shifted from task to task, answering calls, arranging documents, and maintaining a professional composure that masked the subtle stress of keeping the lobby moving smoothly. Vanessa noted every detail, the tilt of heads, the quickened pace, the slight hesitations, and recorded them silently in her notebook. Across the room, a middle-aged client waited with a folder tucked under her arm, scanning the environment with guarded patience. Vanessa could see the tension in her hands, the tightness in her jaw, signs of anticipation mixed with apprehension. Daniel gestured toward his executive team, exchanging brief nods and discussed schedules and upcoming presentations, his voice low but confident, each word calibrated to maintain control. Vanessa's gaze shifted to the ceiling's glass panels, catching the reflections of passing employees, all moving with purpose yet largely unaware of the silent observer in the lobby. She recognized patterns, habits, and inconsistencies, mapping the flow of attention and the hierarchy of interaction that structured the office space. A security guard moved discreetly through the lobby, acknowledging Vanessa with a slight nod, his presence steady, unobtrusive, reinforcing the ordered choreography of the environment. Vanessa's notebook contained more than notes. It held an understanding of relationships, the unspoken agreements and oversights that governed behavior in a high-stakes corporate space. She shifted her stance, noticing the subtle shift in lighting as the sun continued its descent, casting longer shadows and emphasizing the contrast between movement and stillness, authority and observation. Across the lobby, Daniel paused briefly to consult with a subordinate, their conversation muted to the point of near silence, yet Vanessa could discern the underlying deference, the micro-behaviors of recognition, respect, and the unspoken assumptions of rank. She absorbed the details, silently cataloging behavior, tone, and timing, the patterns forming a narrative about the company, its culture, and its people. Vanessa's presence remained quiet but undeniably attentive, a careful witness to the day's unfolding, noticing both the grand gestures and the minute actions that revealed character and priority, subtly documenting the interplay of attention, oversight, and silent influence that defined the environment. The afternoon in the executive suite was filled with the quiet hum of computers, the subtle clatter of keyboards, and the muted rustle of papers as Vanessa Brooks moved deliberately through the space, notebook in hand, observing and cataloging every detail without drawing attention. Her dark eyes scanned the room, noting the positions of chairs, the angles of light reflecting off glass surfaces, and the nuanced expressions of each employee passing by, from the cautious intern with hands fidgeting around a laptop to the mid-level manager adjusting his tie and glancing impatiently at the clock. Vanessa's presence was calm yet commanding in its quiet, a sharp contrast to the understated chaos that lingered just beyond her line of sight, the invisible tension of unspoken hierarchies and assumed authority. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore moved with the precision of someone fully aware of his power, his white shirt crisp and his tie perfectly knotted, his polished shoes echoing softly against the marble floors as he spoke in measured tones to a small group of executives, the cadence of his voice conveying confidence and control. Despite the formality, Vanessa detected micro-expressions, fleeting glances of respect, subtle nods, and the occasional hesitation when instructions were given, the room a choreography of status and influence. She observed Daniel cross the space toward the large windows overlooking the city skyline, pausing briefly to check messages on his tablet, his brows furrowed ever so slightly as if processing multiple layers of information simultaneously, unaware that Vanessa's attention was unflinching and precise. The sunlight shifted, catching on his glasses and casting reflections across the walls, highlighting the distinction between action and observation. Vanessa moved to the corner, quietly jotting notes, each sentence a mental mapping of the corporate ecosystem, noting the flow of energy, who deferred to whom, and the subtle movements that betrayed true priorities beyond spoken words. Outside the window, traffic and distant construction provided a faint, rhythmic backdrop, punctuating the calm yet charged atmosphere within, contrasting with the meticulous human interactions inside. Vanessa's focus remained unwavering. She recorded gestures, subtle facial expressions, and body language that conveyed more than dialogue ever could. Daniel finally turned toward a conference table, speaking to a colleague about upcoming meetings and pending decisions, his tone authoritative yet unaware of the observation across the room, a classic interplay of presence and perception. Vanessa, standing nearly still yet fully alert, noted the nuance in each moment, the silent power dynamics, and the social currents that moved through the suite. Every subtle shift, every fleeting expression, and every nuanced gesture was being absorbed, cataloged, and understood. A rich tapestry of corporate behavior that would later inform her decisions and strategies. Even in stillness, Vanessa's presence conveyed quiet awareness, a mastery of observation, and an unspoken assertion of understanding the intricacies of the environment, the ebb and flow of authority, and the unseen impact of every choice made within that space. The boardroom remained bathed in a warm, late afternoon glow, sunlight streaking across polished oak tables and reflecting off chrome fixtures, while Vanessa Brooks, composed and meticulous, sat quietly at the far end, her fingers lightly drumming against a leather-bound planner, eyes scanning the room with measured attention. Her posture was calm, yet radiating authority that came not from title but from presence and keen observation, absorbing every motion, every subtle shift in tone or glance exchanged between colleagues. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore moved among his team with calculated precision, his expression calm but alert, adjusting papers, nodding to instructions, and responding to questions with the confident inflection of someone used to command, unaware that Vanessa's gaze was tracking every nuanced reaction and gesture. The air was heavy with the unspoken dynamics of status and expectation, a delicate balance of influence that hung between formal politeness and strategic awareness. Vanessa noted the flicker of hesitation in junior staff, the slight pause before a manager answered a question, and the almost imperceptible tilt of Daniel's head as he weighed responses, each a breadcrumb revealing the underlying structure of authority. Outside, the city hummed faintly, distant traffic and occasional sirens providing a rhythmic counterpoint to the soft click of keyboards and the muted shuffle of documents within. Yet Vanessa's focus remained unwavering, registering both the overt interactions and the subtler undercurrents that defined the atmosphere. As Daniel paused near the window reviewing a projected spreadsheet with a colleague, his eyes momentarily clouded with concentration, Vanessa's awareness extended beyond words, capturing posture, tone, and the invisible interplay of confidence and caution that dictated behavior in this high-stakes environment. Her dark skin reflected the subtle sheen of sunlight streaming through blinds, an understated visual presence that contrasted with Daniel's sharply tailored suit and composed, authoritative demeanor. Vanessa's notebook, resting open before her, collected mental annotations. Who deferred to whom, the rhythm of conversation, micro-expressions of doubt or agreement, all forming a tapestry of insight that could inform later decisions, strategies, and interactions. The tension in the room was palpable yet refined, a silent dance of observation, judgment, and anticipation, each participant moving with intent, unaware of the full scope of Vanessa's attentive, analytical presence. Time seemed to stretch in measured increments as she cataloged each gesture, each subtle shift, creating a mental map of influence, authority, and perception. By the time Daniel returned to his chair, unaware of the scrutiny upon him, Vanessa's calm assessment had registered a wealth of information, a quiet accumulation of insight that would allow her to act with precision when the moment arrived, the atmosphere still humming softly with potential and poised energy, every element of the room vibrating with unspoken narrative and anticipation. The day had nearly reached its end when the atmosphere inside the executive floor shifted so subtly that most employees did not notice it at first. The change arrived not through a dramatic announcement, but through a single email. One notification. One subject line. One message sent simultaneously to department heads, senior executives, legal advisors, and members of the board. Vanessa Brooks noticed the reaction immediately. A vice president reading his phone suddenly stopped walking. An assistant who had been laughing quietly moments earlier became serious. Two executives exchanged a glance before disappearing into a nearby conference room. The invisible current moving through the company had changed direction. Vanessa remained seated near the large window overlooking the city, her notebook closed now, resting quietly in her lap. The fading sunlight painted the skyline in shades of gold and amber, reflecting across the glass walls of the building. Below, traffic flowed through the streets like streams of light. Above, inside the executive offices, uncertainty was beginning to spread. Daniel Whitmore stepped out of his office holding a tablet. For the first time all day, his expression appeared unsettled. Not worried. Not frightened. Simply surprised. He scanned the message again while walking toward the boardroom corridor. Several executives approached him almost immediately. Their conversation remained too quiet for anyone else to hear, But Vanessa could read enough from their faces. Something unexpected had happened. Something important. Daniel spoke briefly, nodded once, and instructed everyone to prepare for an emergency board meeting scheduled for the following morning. The announcement spread quickly throughout the upper floors. Employees began speculating. Some assumed it involved investors. Others suspected a merger discussion. A few worried about financial news. Nobody seemed to know the truth. Vanessa listened without participating. Nearby, Emily from reception arrived carrying several folders requested by senior management. When she noticed Vanessa still waiting, her eyes widened. Slightly. "You are still here," she said softly. Vanessa smiled. "I told you I was meeting someone important." Emily laughed gently. "At this point I believe you." There was genuine affection in her voice now. Over the course of the day, Emily had come to admire the quiet patience of the woman everyone else overlooked. Vanessa glanced toward the boardroom hallway where executives continued moving in and out with unusual urgency. "Sometimes important meetings take longer to arrange than people expect," she replied. Emily followed her gaze. "Do you know what is happening?" Vanessa paused for a moment before answering. "I think some people are about to learn information they should have known much earlier." The statement lingered in the air even after Emily returned to work. Across the floor, Daniel entered another discussion with legal counsel. His movements remained controlled, but Vanessa noticed the subtle tension around his eyes. Throughout the day he had managed every situation with confidence. Now uncertainty had entered the equation. Not because he lacked ability, but because there were pieces of the story he did not yet possess. The final sunlight slipped behind the distant buildings, leaving the office illuminated by soft interior lights. Reflections shimmered across glass conference room walls as employees slowly gathered documents and prepared to leave. Yet despite the approaching evening, the executive floor remained unusually active. Questions remained unanswered. Expectations continued building. And while everyone searched for clues about tomorrow's emergency meeting, the one person holding the most important answers sat quietly near the window, unnoticed by almost everyone. Her calm expression unchanged as the company moved steadily toward a revelation that would alter every assumption made that day. The following morning arrived with an unexpected quietness, the city skyline bathed in a soft early light that reflected off towering glass buildings, giving the impression that the world itself was holding its breath. Vanessa Brooks arrived at the executive floor first, her presence calm and composed, yet alert, sensing the weight of the day ahead. As employees began to trickle in, some casting curious glances toward the boardroom, whispering softly among themselves, their expressions a mix of anticipation and unease. She walked slowly down the corridor, noticing the subtle changes in the atmosphere, the difference between ordinary routine and the electric tension of a day that would reveal truths long ignored. Her black tailored blazer fit perfectly, giving her an air of quiet authority that belied the careful calculations of her mind, while Daniel Whitmore entered shortly after, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark tie, holding a portfolio tightly under his arm, his eyes scanning the faces of colleagues with a growing unease that he struggled to mask, realizing that the information about Vanessa he had been oblivious to until this morning could shift the entire dynamic of the company. Employees gathered outside the boardroom, murmuring quietly, speculating what could be so urgent, while the receptionist organized folders and documents, every small action underscoring the gravity of the unfolding moment. Vanessa paused for a moment near the corner window, observing the city below, the movement of people and cars mirroring the subtle currents of anticipation flowing through the office. The boardroom door opened and the senior executives entered, followed by legal advisors, their expressions precise but tense, acknowledging the presence of Vanessa as more than a peer, but as someone whose influence would now reshape discussions. Daniel approached cautiously, his stride controlled, each step revealing a mix of respect and surprise, the knowledge of Vanessa's stake in the company altering the assumptions he had made about every past interaction, every overlooked proposal, and every decision in which he had failed to recognize her authority. The meeting began with formal greetings, but the air was thick with a silent tension. Vanessa's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the subtle stiffness of Daniel's posture, his hands gripping the edge of the table as he realized the weight of his previous assumptions. As presentations unfolded, Vanessa offered insights with precision, each comment measured yet impactful, commanding attention naturally without overt force. The executives leaned forward, taking notes, occasionally exchanging glances that betrayed their acknowledgement of the shift in leadership dynamics, while Daniel watched quietly, internalizing the new reality. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows illuminated faces, highlighting expressions of realization, admiration, and surprise as Vanessa guided discussions toward strategic considerations that had previously been underestimated. By mid-morning, it became clear that the authority she held was no longer a secret. Her influence was acknowledged in every question directed to her, and in every response she provided, illustrating a mastery of business acumen that left no room for doubt. Daniel remained attentive, his previous confidence tempered by respect, acknowledging that the perspective he had overlooked for so long was now central to the company's direction. Throughout the session, subtle nods, quiet agreements, and thoughtful pauses punctuated the discourse, creating a rhythm that balanced recognition, revelation, and strategic planning, setting the stage for a new chapter in the company where authority and respect aligned with actual ownership and vision. As the afternoon sun streamed through the towering glass windows of the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of unspoken realizations. Vanessa Brooks maintained a composed demeanor, her posture straight and confident, every subtle movement exuding authority, while Daniel Whitmore sat opposite, his hands clasped on the polished oak table, eyes shifting from the spreadsheets to Vanessa's steady gaze, processing the undeniable truth that her presence and stake in the company were no longer peripheral but central to every strategic decision being discussed. The room buzzed quietly with the soft murmurs of advisors and colleagues, papers shuffling, laptops humming, and pens tapping against legal pads, the cadence of office life punctuated by the silent acknowledgement of a shift in hierarchy that had been overlooked until this critical moment. Vanessa's voice, calm yet commanding, articulated perspectives on revenue streams, expansion plans, and operational efficiencies, each point meticulously structured, demonstrating her thorough understanding of company operations and market positioning. Daniel found himself noting the precision in her analysis, the way she highlighted risks and mitigations with clarity, prompting nods from senior executives who now recognized her insight as indispensable, their previous assumptions about her involvement challenged and reshaped by the unfolding dialogue. Outside the room, staff moved with purpose, delivering documents, coordinating schedules, and occasionally peeking through glass walls, sensing the tension and significance of what was transpiring, while inside, Vanessa emphasized collaboration and inclusive strategy, subtly integrating her experience and foresight to guide the discussion toward tangible action plans. Daniel's initial surprise transformed into a respectful attentiveness, his earlier oversight of her influence replaced by a cautious admiration, acknowledging her expertise without diminishing his own role, but recognizing the balance of authority had now shifted to reflect true ownership and competence. As the meeting progressed, small moments of interaction, a carefully framed question, a concise clarification, a shared understanding, illustrated the evolving dynamics between Vanessa and Daniel, with every exchange reinforcing the notion that respect and decision-making were now aligned with actual stakes in the company. By the late afternoon, the boardroom was filled with a quiet determination, executives and staff alike adjusting their strategies and expectations in real time, the energy charged not by conflict but by the realization of competence, authority, and rightful recognition. Vanessa's calm, measured control set the tone for the remaining discussions, each word reinforcing her position, while Daniel's measured responses reflected both acknowledgement and adaptation, his previous assumptions. Recalibrated, the narrative of the company subtly but irrevocably redirected to a future where insight, equity, and acknowledgement of true leadership would guide every critical choice, every investment decision, and every strategic initiative. The evening light filtered softly through the sleek windows of the corporate suite, casting long shadows across the polished floors as Vanessa Brooks moved gracefully among the board members, her presence commanding attention without a hint of arrogance, her voice steady, conveying insight and direction as she articulated strategies for upcoming market expansions and detailed analyses of fiscal projections, while Daniel Whitmore watched intently, his initial surprise now replaced by careful consideration as he absorbed the full measure of her knowledge and stake in the company, noting how her influence had subtly but firmly redirected the conversation toward actionable steps and priorities that aligned with her substantial ownership. Advisors and department heads leaned forward, scribbling notes and exchanging subtle nods, their previous assumptions about her role corrected in real time, as the room buzzed with a quiet energy of recognition and recalibrated respect, acknowledging that Vanessa's decisions were now central to the company's direction. Throughout the discussion, Vanessa highlighted operational efficiencies, human resource strategies, and potential partnerships, presenting data and projections with clarity, and when questions arose, she addressed them with concise reasoning that demonstrated not only her comprehension of complex corporate structures but also her foresight in anticipating challenges, her calm demeanor reinforcing her authority and commanding the room's attention. Daniel's expressions shifted gradually, from polite attentiveness to genuine acknowledgement, his responses measured and collaborative, demonstrating both his acceptance of her leadership and his willingness to integrate her vision with his own executive experience, establishing a dynamic of mutual professional respect that replaced earlier misjudgments and oversights. The interactions between Vanessa and Daniel were punctuated by subtle gestures, a raised eyebrow, a considered pause, a nod of agreement that signaled understanding and alignment, the room absorbing the new equilibrium of power as staff members monitored the discussion, recognizing the shift in authority without disruption, their movements respectful of the evolving professional hierarchy. As the evening progressed, strategic plans were refined, decisions solidified, and communication lines clarified, all under Vanessa's steady guidance, her analytical approach and confident articulation ensuring that every executive in the room grasped the significance of her role and the implications for company initiatives. Daniel, now fully engaged and supportive, coordinated with her seamlessly, reinforcing the emerging balance of authority and insight. The energy in the boardroom a combination of focus, realization, and forward-looking intent, as Vanessa's influence cemented itself not through confrontation but through competence, composure, and unwavering clarity, setting the stage for the company's next phase of growth with a renewed sense of direction and mutual professional respect between the two central figures. The meeting finally came to an end as the last traces of daylight faded beyond the glass walls, leaving the city wrapped in a sea of lights that stretched toward the horizon like countless stars resting on the earth. One by one, the executives gathered their folders and laptops, quietly leaving the boardroom with expressions very different from the ones they had carried into it that morning. The atmosphere had changed. Not because of a dramatic confrontation, not because someone had been removed from power. It had changed because truth had finally entered the room. Vanessa Brooks remained seated for a moment after everyone else stood, her notebook resting beside her, the same notebook she had carried while waiting hour after hour without complaint. The polished conference table reflected the soft overhead lights, creating a calm glow across the room. Daniel Whitmore lingered near the window overlooking the city. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than any presentation that had been delivered throughout the day. Finally Daniel took a slow breath and turned toward her. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Vanessa looked at him without judgment. "For what?" she asked. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. "For not seeing you." The honesty in his voice surprised even him. Vanessa considered the words. Throughout her life she had heard many apologies. Some were offered out of obligation. Others came from embarrassment. This one felt different. Daniel was not apologizing because of her ownership stake. He was apologizing because he had finally understood something about himself. Vanessa stood and slowly walked toward the window. The city lights reflected softly against the glass. "Most people think they see others," she said. "What they really see are their assumptions." Daniel nodded. He remembered every moment from the previous day. The woman sitting quietly in the lobby. The hours he walked past without asking who she was. The conclusions he formed without evidence. The opportunities he missed to simply treat another person with curiosity and respect. Vanessa smiled gently. "The good news is that assumptions can change." Daniel looked at her. "You could have embarrassed me in front of everyone today." Vanessa laughed softly. And what would that have accomplished? The answer left him speechless. She turned toward the conference table where documents remained neatly organized from the day's discussions. A company does not become stronger when people are humiliated. It becomes stronger when people learn. Outside the boardroom, employees continued finishing their workday. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Conversations drifted through distant hallways. Life moved forward as it always did. Yet something important had shifted beneath the surface. Word of the meeting had already begun spreading through the building. Employees spoke about Vanessa's insight, her calm leadership, and the respect she commanded without ever demanding it. Down in the lobby, Emily smiled when she heard the truth. The maintenance worker Vanessa had helped smile too. For them, the revelation confirmed something they had sensed long before anyone else. Character reveals itself long before titles do. Vanessa picked up her notebook and prepared to leave. Daniel walked with her toward the elevator. This time he did not walk ahead. He walked beside her. When the elevator doors opened, Vanessa stepped inside and turned back toward him. "How many great people have you ignored because they did not look important?" she asked softly. The question settled over him like a mirror he could not avoid. The doors slowly closed. Daniel remained standing in the hallway, watching the reflection disappear. And for the first time in a very long time, the most valuable lesson he learned about leadership had nothing to do with business at all.